Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of videos. Today I want to talk about an opening that truly is quite scary. That is the Latvian Gambit. And well, I wasn't really going to do much on this particular opening as part of my opening repertoire guide, but it's significant enough and sharp enough that I think it warrants its own video. And today we're going to have a look at some of those variations in it and what could go wrong if you don't treat this gambit with a little bit of respect. Let's take a look. So let's have a look into how we reach this particular move order. So to reach a Latvian Gambit, the first moves are 1e4, which we've already recommended as part of our opening repertoire guide with 1e4. And after the move e5, which is now the king's pawn game, we now play our next best move, the move knight to f3, attacking the pawn and controlling the centre four squares, which we know is very important in the opening. Now here is where black can throw his first spanner into the works here. Instead of defending this pawn with natural moves such as knight to c6 or maybe even d6, here black is going to play a very odd looking move, the counter-attacking move pawn to f5. Now this is known as the Latvian Gambit and it's an extremely double-edged move. Depending on who you ask, this move is either really bad for black or a surprising move that black can play to lead white out of his comfort zone for an easy win. I guess to understand the logic of this particular move though, we need to look at another move order on the white side. So if I just go back just a moment, after e4, e5 and f4, we reach what's known as the King's Gambit on the white side. And this is a popular club player line and online a blitz line as well, where white is trying to distract one of black's central pawns away from the centre in order to take over the centre with moves such as knight to f3 and maybe pawn to d4. So just to show you that after the capture, we give up a pawn and then, I don't know, depending what black does, we can then take over the centre. Obviously this is not a good move from black, but I just want to illustrate some of the key ideas for white here. So by giving up a pawn, he's then taken over the centre and he hopes to have a very good game. Going back to what we've just seen on the white side, the black side has a similar logic. By playing the move f5, black is hoping to get almost like a King's Gambit, but in reverse, in that maybe he can distract a pawn away from the centre and then take over the centre with his own pawns or even his own pieces. We will see though that actually having one less move compared to white though does mean that black gets a quite inferior version of the King's Gambit, which can make their position sometimes not so good. So what do I recommend against this particular move order? Well, I'm going to recommend playing the move knight takes on e5, and the reason why I think this is such a good move is it's immediately exposing black's weakness of his last move, in that it's now threatening to come with the queen onto h5 to give a check to the black king. If black doesn't do anything useful against this move, let's say, just to give you an example, let's say black plays a rubbish waiting move like a6, here queen to h5 is just devastating. That black is now in check and there's no good ways to deal with this particular check. If he moves his king forward, this is going to end in absolute disaster for black. His king is going to get flushed out and it should lead to a very quick checkmate. Going back though, if they play the move g6, which is the other move which does block the check, the problem is black has got a strong sacrifice here, the move knight takes on g6. And notice here that black cannot recapture this pawn as it will allow the queen to capture this rook with a check. So it's with this in mind, that the Latvian Gambit can be seen as a bit of a dubious line due to this particular strong tactic that white has at his disposal. Before I go through my recommendation any further though, I just want to go on a small tangent and have a look at the move e takes on f5. This is actually the most popular move according to the Lee chess database and has been played a few times on the master game database. If you whack it in on an engine, you'll also notice that the engine gives this move plus 1.6, which does suggest that this is, a serious move that white should also potentially play. Now, I think this move is fine, but it does give black some complications, and there are some very weird move orders here that black can play to really stir up this position. Now, I think personally, if you're going to be playing against a particularly dodgy line like the Latvian Gambit, I don't think it's a good idea to play into your opponent's hand and go for a very chaotic position. I think you can certainly go for much stronger lines, which you'll see in the knight takes an e5 line, which will really shut up black in his opening phase. So here, black has got a nice strong move. He can play the move e4, hitting this knight. After the knight comes to e5, this is now renewing this threat of playing the queen onto h5 and going for this check. Black must play the move knight to f6 to block this. All seems fine so far. What could be so bad? Black has got a knight developed. He's going to play bishop e7 and castle. The problem is white has got another strong move here, bishop to e2. And this move now renews this threat on this diagonal. Notice, again, there's a big problem, this diagonal, because it's going to force the king to have to move. You can't castle anymore, and it's going to maybe mess up your development. Here, though, black can play the move bishop to e7, which looks as though black is just ignoring this and going, oh, I'm going to castle. The problem is it runs into bishop to h5. Now, this is where things get interesting. After the check, the king can come to f8, and it looks as though black is just allowing white to walk into this fork with knight to f7. The interesting thing about this move, and when I was doing some research, I was looking at a particularly good video by Mio the Butcher. He was actually analysing this particular line and going, actually, this is not so bad for black. Now queen to e8 could be played, and after knight takes in h8, it looks as though white is really far ahead in material, but after a move such as knight takes on h5, it actually turns out that white's not doing all that good. At some point he's going to get his pieces now developed in the centre, capture this pawn on f5, develop his knight onto c6, and this knight over here on h8 is going to get captured very quickly. Just the king can just come over and capture it on 2 moves. So really, I actually don't think this line is all that amazing. Having said that, looking at the engine, minus 0.2. So even though black has played what looks to be natural looking moves to expose this gambit, well, it turns out it's not particularly engine improved, and it looks as though that black should now get a nice equal position. So you have to be quite careful in this particular. Now, there are some other moves that white could have played here that does maybe guarantee a small edge for him. But as you can see, it's not so clear cut. It's going to lead to some complications for white to have to deal with. So instead, we're going to capture this pawn on e5, having this threat of just playing the queen onto h5. Now, there are a number of moves that black can play here. We're first going to have a look at all moves that do not address this problem of queen to h5. Now, the first move that doesn't address this line is actually a very old line, and when I say very old, we're talking about 17th century old. It's called the Greco Variation. It's only been played, it's the 6th most popular move on the Lee chess database, but it's not particularly good. Well, what does this queen move do? Well, it's now attacking this knight and maybe delivering a counterattack here on e4. The good news here is now it doesn't do anything about this problem on h5, so queen to h5 check. If the king just moves, well, knight to f7 just seems sufficient to a good advantage. And what's embarrassing about this for black is that he has to play his king back to e8. He can't obviously give up his queen because you're going to take back. And after you take this rook, it comes with a check. So it's a bit not pretty suspect here. G6 could be played to block the check, but you can just exchange down, and this is just a very good position for white. He's up 5 points in material. Maybe just play simple moves such as bishop here and castles, and should have a really easy game. So of course, after this check, G6 is pretty much forced, but again it falls into this trap of knight takes on G6, renewing this threat on the rook. Now it looks as though it shouldn't be too bad for black, as he might have some counter-attacking options here. So let's just say, for example, he captures here on e4. This looks interesting, but bishop to e2 just blocks it quite nicely. You can't play moves such as knight takes on g2, by the way. It looks interesting, but in actual fact it's completely losing to not just taking this rook, but actually playing knight to f4, and well, the queen is just lost here. So going back, instead, let's just say the knight just develops, and it looks as though there's some problems here for white, because he can't take this because the black knight is going to capture the queen. But white can do fine with a move such as queen to h3, and at least this defends this pawn. We're looking to maybe castle short, maybe, or even just play moves such as d3, knight c3. I think this is probably a bit more sound. If h takes on g6, you could just take the rook, and you're still up materially. I don't really think that black has anything really significant here. You could take this, but you just move your rook along, and you're still up 2 points in material. I think white's doing fine here. You're just going to play moves such as this, castle long, and just have a nice edge in this position. Whack on my engine, +3. I think it's unsurprising that this line should score white a decent game. So queen to takes on e4 doesn't really offer anything for black. What about moves such as knight to f6? Well, against this just doesn't work, as well, you can just do a mass exchange here. You could take on f5, but taking on c8 is just really strong, and you're up quite a lot of material and should have a nice game. You may also think to play moves such as h takes on g6, but against this you can just take the rook, and after this capture, bishop to e2. What's different about this particular line is this knight is not on f6 compared to the other lines, so actually this knight's going to have a pretty difficult time to develop. So I think you even get a much bigger improvement to the first line we looked at. Okay, queen can take on g2 here, rook to f1. I don't think there's anything here that white needs to worry about. Once again, you're going to look to castle on the long side, get your pieces out, and then castle long, and I think white should do absolutely fine here. So despite its age, I think queen to e7 really doesn't offer anything for black here. I think white should secure a nice advantage against this particular line. Going back, what else could black play? Well, another move that has been tried, but again doesn't do anything about dealing with this threat of queen to h5, is the move d6. Once again, queen to h5 is just really strong. Okay, we don't need to think this out too much. King to e7 is funny because it leads to immediate checkmate with queen to f7. So g6, yep, has to be played once again. And again, we can take here on g6. Notice actually, I think this line is even worse for black, as this d6 move is not really doing anything. At least compared with the e7 move, he had some counterattack. Black really hasn't got anything here. Okay, you could play the move knight to f6, and here we need to be a little bit careful where we position our queen. In some lines the queen belongs on h4, and in some lines it belongs on h3. In this instance you need to play the queen to h4 here. You don't want to play it to h3, because the issue with this is, compared to the other line that we were looking at, this pawn can now capture this pawn here, and by doing so unleash this bishop onto the queen. So it's not going to lead to a nice position for white. you're going to lose the tempo, and well, actually black gets some decent counterplay here. So you definitely don't want to play moves such as this. So instead, queen to h4 is the move that needs to be played here. Okay, couple moves that black has played here. We'll look at h takes g6 once again. I think we can be happy with this move, although it looks as though black gets a little bit of counterplay with moves such as queen to e7. In actual fact, it turns out that this line is very similar to something that we've already looked at, except black is actually a move behind. So we looked at the queen e7 line. This is actually even slightly worse because black is another move behind. Bishop to e7 seems sufficient. Okay, you might just keep developing here, but you can now castle, and I think actually white is doing absolutely fine here. If he keeps developing, looking to maybe castle long, you can just play simple looking moves. And I really don't think white has too much to worry about. Yes, black has got a lot of development here, and he might start generating a big attack here, but you're still up 4 points in material, and I think this attack should be, you should be able to survive this particular attack. If you're not interested in that though, I mean d3 is also fine as well. If they take here, take back, and okay, the knight could take here, but you just develop. And you might even just, I don't know, play moves such as bishop here, knight here, and castle long maybe. I don't know. It's up to you. I really don't think there's too much though to worry about in these particular lines. The other move that has been played here is rook to g8, just getting out of this threat. But against this, we should now just part ways with our knight, capture here on f8. I think black's best move here is just to take with the rook. I think if he takes with the king, he can't castle anymore. So I just don't really think this offers too much for black. But taking here with the rook seems fine. Now we can play a move such as d3. And again, we've got similar paths of development, playing our knight, our bishop out, and maybe castling long. I think white should secure a nice edge. Okay, so that's really just the big problem with d6. Again, doesn't do anything to address this issue of queen to h5. Another move that still doesn't address this problem is f takes an e4. It might look interesting. It does look like it should be thematic with some other ideas within the Latvian Gambit, but again, it just fails miserably to queen to h5 check. Really not a huge amount that black can do. Again, just to show you some hilarity, if this happens, then you're going to get a very, very nice game. There is actually, I think, a checkmating line here. That's quite funny to see. I'll just show you some funny stuff here where there's this quite interesting checkmate in just a moment. Let's get it up on here. Something like this, and then you can actually checkmate two different ways here. Knight to a5 checkmate, or knight to e5 checkmate. But basically, black should not do this at all, and if you see this happen, you should just chase the king, just keep checking him, and you should have a very decent game. So going back, obviously a move like that doesn't work, so instead g6, yep, once again has to be played. Knight takes on g6, and okay, black's best response, I think, here is just to put his knight onto f6 to try and hit the queen, but there's a bit of a difference with this line compared to what we've looked at already. The difference being that because this pawn is captured, this now opens up a new avenue to attack the black king. Now we can play the move queen to e5 check, and let's say he blocks with the bishop, we can just take this rook here on h8, and there's no negative repercussions to taking this rook. We're just up a clear 6 points of material. Black's king is still not safe, and I really don't see any good compensation for this loss of this rook. I think white's going to enjoy a really good game here. So going back, instead of this, king to f7 has also been played, but again, this just falls, and this is probably even worse because there's a check here. Okay, king can come to g7, I guess, which is now threatening to take the knight, but I think just moves such as this. I mean, it just looks, black's position looks a bit ridiculous. King to h8, you're up 3 points in material. I really don't see how this is any good for black. Bishop to g5, threatening to swap off some material. Yeah, it's no good for black here. So f takes an e4. Yeah, nothing really works in this particular line. I think white should secure a good edge here. So we're now going to have a look at some more testing lines that black can play against our move knight takes on e5. So we're going to have now a look at the third most popular move, and it's an interesting sideline, and that is the move knight to c6. Sorry. Now, what's fascinating about this particular line is that black has scored quite well on this line. When I say quite well, he's won 51% of the games compared to white's 46%. And I thought that was quite unusual, considering when you check this with an engine at this point, it says that in fact white is winning by 3.4. And I thought that was quite surprising. You know, this is not just a sort of slightly dubious line, and this should be kind of blunder territory. I mean, if you try and play, you know, computer against a computer with a plus 3.4 advantage, that's normally enough for the computer to easily get a win. However, we're only human, and as a result, only humans in this position have tended to do a little bit worse here. And it's all to do with the fact that black can get some interesting counterplay and potential traps that white could fall in that black does somewhat better in this line. Now, before I go over the more challenging line, which is queen to h5, which is, I think, the best move here, and it does give white that +3 edge, I do want to say a little downside about this line, and a bit of a safer line here for white, is just capturing here on c6. Okay, d takes on c6, you could then maybe take here on f5, allow the bishop to come out, but after these set of moves, I'll be honest with you, I mean, white seems to do okay here, is up a pawn. Okay, it's only +1, and actually black has got some interesting ideas, and maybe castle, queen to d7, castle long, and can maybe put some pressure on white's king side. But I'd say, you know, I don't think it's too bad for white. I think he's up a pawn, and he's not inflicted any weaknesses on his own position, and he's got a weakness to maybe go after. So I would say that this line is okay for white if you want to get a modest edge. But let's be honest, we need to have a look at this queen h5, because as we've seen already, if black doesn't deal with this threat, I think white should have a winning advantage. Now, king to e7, we should talk about the elephant in the room here. Well, this just loses spectacularly. Queen to f7, d6. I will just show you as a funny line here, you can actually get a forced checkmate in 5 with a pawn on b3. So there we go. The reason why this leads to a forced checkmate is because with this knight here on c6, the king hasn't got this king move to c6, which does offer him maybe just some slightly more room. But yeah, it should lead to disaster. And if your opponent does foolishly play this, you should be absolutely fine. So of course, pawn to d6 has to be played here. Then king takes on d6, again renewing this threat. You know, black has got to deal with this somehow. Knight to f6, hitting the queen. And here we need to be careful with our positioning of our queen. Now, as I said in one of the other lines, queen to h4 was better. In this position, actually, you need to play the move queen to h3. It guards this g2 pawn, but also there's some other kind of issues with why you want to play queen to h3. It's all to do with this rook to g8, because in some lines this rook can actually gain a tempo on the queen if it goes to h4 versus h3. So just to show you that, if queen to h4, now black can play rook to g8, and here let's say white just captures this rook here. Black doesn't actually need to immediately recapture here with his rook. Instead, he can play the challenging move rook to g4 here, now hitting this queen. Okay, black could play the move queen to h6, which does hold on to this knight, but against this, rook takes on e4 check. Bishop to e2. Now black starts generating a bit of pressure here. He's got two pieces hitting this bishop. Okay, you might just decide to defend it with this knight, but now you can sacrifice a rook, play knight to d4. You know, white can't save both of these knights here now. So let's say castles, trying to get himself out of danger. Now knight takes here, king to h1, and you don't want to play queen takes because it runs into this pin afterwards. So instead, you've got to play the move here. Knight takes on c1, so just giving back some material. Material is now even. After the following sequence, there will be a check. King to f7. Everything is actually safe here. You're not going to get checked anymore on your king. And after a move such as this, it's funny because black has secured a 0.6 disadvantage here, which, to be honest with you, is not bad considering this line is meant to be super dubious. So it's kind of what black wants here, and I think if you're the white player, you know, I think you would be a bit, I think, disappointed that this line doesn't really offer much for black here. So that's what happens if you go all the way back here, if you play queen to h4. It's funny how all of these things transpire just on one move. So instead, you've got to play the move queen to h3. Let me just turn the engine off for a sec. Now, rook to d8 can be played, but he no longer has this tempo idea with rook to g4. So now you can just safely take here on f8. After the rook recaptures back, he kind of has to take back with the rook. If he takes back the king, his king can't castle, as I said, and that just looks a bit silly. Looks very, very silly. So captures here. You can take this pawn. This queen now actually holds on to this pawn, which is nice. Here d5 could be played, trying to get his bishop out, but of course it's still going to be quite awkward how he gets his bishop out because the queen is defending everything. You can now play the move bishop to b5. And what this basically is saying is, because you're ahead materially, try and swap off your pieces and you should have a good game. Okay, black could play the move queen to e7, throwing in a check. And it's actually a mistake to play king to d1. It looks good because it looks as though you're getting your rook here to attack the queen, but actually knight to e4 is really, really strong, and actually white is as good as dead because you're threatening this fork. And if, let's say, the queen comes here, you just smash through with the rook, and this is looking really, really bad. f3, for example, you can play this move, and okay, there could be this exchange, but it runs into just all kinds of problems for white. So yeah, really bad. It's funny because the queen has to play there, because if he doesn't, he's going to get checkmated very quickly. If he moves his queen anywhere else, I don't know, let's say he comes up here, then it runs into this, and this is in fact well, almost checkmate. You've got this move, haven't you? And then you can take king here. I don't know. Let's see how we can get checkmates here. I'm going to mess this up now, aren't I? Is that checkmate? No, it's not. Why is that not checkmate? Oh, you can go here, I suppose. Is that checkmate? Almost. Yeah, there we go, checkmate. Okay, but just wanted to show you that line, just to show you what's so bad about it. So, going back, you don't want to play that move. So instead, you want to play the move queen to e3. You know, your idea here in this line, because you're ahead materially, just make sure you go for good trades here and good swaps. You might then take the bishop here on f5. You swap everything off. Okay, black has got everything developed, but he really has nothing left here. He's only got a couple rooks, a knight and a bishop to try and deliver checkmate against your king. But after a sort of safe move such as d3, you're just going to look to castle long. Don't maybe castle short in a lot of the lines, just because you might run into some potential problems here. But castle long and you should have a good game. And what even this move at this point is threatening, just bishop to g5, swap the knight for the bishop for the knight, develop here, and then get your king castled. And I think you're going to do absolutely fine in this line. So what we've just seen with the Fraser defense with knight c6 is white has a couple pleasant options. He could just take here and have a pleasant game, or alternatively go into black's kind of territory by playing queen to h5, but he should come out much, much better. Let's have a look at now the two main responses, the two lines that give black maybe the game that he wants, and these are the two most popular lines that played, just above 30% each. The first move is knight to c6, knight to f6, and queen to f6 is the move that's been played the most on both the master game database and also the lead chess database. Now these two moves finally deal with this issue of queen to h5, giving this check. Now after the move knight to f6, which defends this, our move that we want to play here is the very strong bishop to c4. Why it's so strong? Well, it's just simply attacking this f7 square. That's it. That's all it does. We're also now about to castle, which should get our king safe. And really, black hasn't got anything here. I think you're going to get a very, very good game. He can't deal with this threat. He might try d5, which looks almost reminiscent of that of like a fried liver attack, giving back a pawn. But after e takes on d5, you're actually not giving back a pawn here at all. You're still down a pawn here. That you're down 2 pawns now. Bishop to d6 could be played to stop this threat. d4. I mean, castles, knight here, f4. This king, this knight is so firmly entrenched in black's position. There's nothing he can do about it because he's given up his d pawn. He didn't have an adequate way to try and kick this knight away. So you just have to defend it, and you'll have a very decent game here. Just to play a few more moves that's been played before. Here. Stuff like this. I mean, you've got such a big pawn center. It's funny in these particular line. This has been played about 100 times. Black has actually lost this game because now he's got 2 pawns attacking as a nice fork here. So yeah, this is just a terrible game for black here in this line. So obviously, pawn to d5 just doesn't work here. So instead, other moves that have been played, other tries that have been interesting. Let's first have a look at f takes on e4. Well, against this we need to be extremely careful, as the move that looks obvious here now is knight to f7, but this is the only time where we need to actually remember to play bishop to f7 check. This is the best move. The reason why is actually black is trying to encourage white to make a mistake here by playing the move knight to f7. This actually goes into a very scary looking line that's known as the corkscrew counter gambit. Okay, white now forks both the queen and the rook. We've got to save one of them. We're going to save the queen, obviously. Knight takes on h8. It looks really good. The problem is it runs into this anvil of a move, d5. Where is this bishop going to go? It comes back to b3. Just look at black's development. He's so far ahead. He's got a good knight. He's got the whole centre to himself. He's going to play g4. And embarrassingly, this is just a really good move because now white's going to have to give back a pawn with f3. E takes on f3. And there's really not much he can do here. He has to play a really stupid move like king to f2, because if he doesn't, he's going to run into check, take the queen. So king to f2 needs to be played just to also show. I mean, obviously queen to e2 would just fail to well, you can actually checkmate in one move. But king to f2, throw in a check, king to f1, throw in the check, and you would not believe it, but there has been 2,400 games that's ended this way. Absolutely crazy. So black just gets an irresistible initiative here that really white cannot deal with. He just has not got a good enough piece development against black's development to survive this particular position. So going back here, this move is in fact a mistake. We don't play knight to f7. We need to actually play the move bishop to f7 with check. And what this does is basically it forces this king out to e7. Now the king can't castle. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Play the bishop back to b3. Our advantage is the fact that the king can't castle, and actually we're still threatening to play knight to f7. d5 could be played here in this line to stop that threat, but now you just castle. What's so wrong about this position for white? He's stopped black from castling. His king is in the centre. He's not up materially here, but it doesn't matter. His king is safe, and I think it gives himself a good edge here. Knight to c6 has been played the most here, but you just take this off, get rid of this knight, d3, and, well, yeah, I think white's doing fine here. Okay, as I say, in this particular line. It's by no means like crushing. I don't think it's completely refuted this line. We're looking at plus 1.4. I mean, depending on who you are, you might say, yeah, this is a total domination. Black does still get a few little chances, but he's still going to take a bit of time to get his king safe. You know, he's going to waste 2 moves just getting his king to maybe g8 to keep it safe. And, you know, that means then how does he get this rook out? How does he get all his pieces out? There's lots of problems for black to deal with here that I just doesn't make this line particularly appetizing for me. The final move that black has maybe tried to deal with this threat is the move queen to e7. This is now hitting this knight. Here you've got to play again a little bit accurately here and play the move d4. Might surprise you, but the idea of playing d4 is firstly it defends this knight, but it also opens this diagonal for this bishop, and you're going to see why that's important a bit later. Here black has pretty much always played d6, now trying to kick this knight off this square and then take this pawn. Now you can play knight to f7, hitting this rook, and against queen to e4 check, again another accurate move you need to find here, king to f1. Deals with all the threats. You're now going to develop your pieces. This pawn on g2 is defended, and actually this queen is looking a bit ridiculous on this square. He might try d5 here to try and hit your bishop, but now you've just played bishop to d3. And what you'll notice here is this kind of, I guess, exemplified why we put this this pawn on d4, because we now open up this bishop and he can't use the square for his queen to maybe come to maybe cause a bit of nuisance in white's position. So now, okay, black is normally played bishop to e6, but just to show you it's quite hilarious, if you take here on d4, this fails spectacularly to bishop to b5 check, picking up this queen via a discovery check. So queen backs to e6, you can now take this rook, you're up 5 points materially, just a really good game. Okay, black could play queen to g8 to try and recover some material, but let's be honest here, I mean white is just clearly better. If we're having to put this queen onto h8 to recover not even all our material, then I think something's clearly wrong in black's position. So white should have a good game here. So we're now going to finally look at the main line here, and the move that's not only been the most played on the Lichess database, but also on the master game database. That is the move queen to f6. And what this move does is it deals with this threat of queen to h5. Why does it deal with it? Well, if you play queen to h5 now, the problem with this is it runs into g6. You'll notice here that white has got an uncomfortable fork here. Both his queen and his knight are under attack, and he's actually going to lose either one of them. Now, you could take the here on g6 with your knight, but the problem here is actually h takes on g6 is absolutely fine, because you notice here that the rook is now defended by the queen, can't take the pawn, so you end up having to play a ridiculous move like queen to e2. And black is actually better in this line, he's up materially. Okay, you know, just to show you an advantage line, let's say this. Well, this is very good for black now. Going to exchange off, and he's going to end up being a pawn up with a decent game. His king can still castle as well, so you can just get, you know, stuff like this and castle long and have a very decent game on the black side. So this is where we need to use our other motif, which is the move d4. This is quite popular in a lot of the main lines here, because what this move does is it just holds on to this knight, and it also simultaneously opens up potential for this bishop. Now, if black doesn't deal with this knight here, you're just going to run into c4 and you're going to have a very good game. So d6 is pretty much universally played here, trying to kick this knight away to get rid of this threat. Now we play the funky looking move knight to c4. This will have some ideas later on in the position. Just wait for a second. Here f takes an e4 can be played by black, and it looks as though all of black's issues are going to be solved soon, as he's now threatening to play the move d5. The issue here is now white can play the move c3. It deals with not only the d5 move, but now it's threatening to take this pawn, which will get a valuable tempo on this queen. Queen to g6 has now been played, and we reach a line that has been analysed before. It's called the Greco Variation. Notice here that the queen is now defending this pawn, but he's also vacated the square for the knight to come onto f6. So it looks as though black's position doesn't look dreadful here. Okay, he's also, again, he's still dealing with all these threats of queen to h5 with these weird looking queen moves. Now, this is where black must play accurately. Not many players know this line on the Lead Chess database. It's only been played 12% of the time. But the move here to get an advantage is the move f3. Might surprise you. It looks a bit weird. It looks like some strange looking, I don't know, Black Mardima type gambity type thing. But the reason why this move works so well is the threat is very simple. White is just going to recapture this pawn in the center, and he's also going to, you know, he's just going to have a good position as a result. Now, if you take this pawn, the problem here is now queen takes here, and there's really nothing that black can do because he's going to run into the move bishop to d3, followed by a move such as castle. So just to show you that, if I have knight to f6, bishop to g3, and actually black's position is dreadful here. It's dreadful because he has to move his queen yet again, but there's not many good squares for it to go to. If he goes to f7, you know, what's wrong with white's position? You know, he's got all his pieces developed. He's maybe threatening moves such as this to start, I don't know, well, maybe not here because the queen defends it, but he's threatening things like check and then bishop here and getting all his pieces developed. He's not down materially, of course, black, but I can't see how black's position is any good in this position. So, funnily enough, when you turn on the engine, the move that's been recommended is queen to g4, trying to swap off the pieces and maybe survive this position because, okay, black can argue the position, the pawn structure is symmetrical and he's not got any pawn weaknesses here. But castles, okay, queen takes, rook takes, you know, where is black's development? This is not what he would have wanted out of this particular line because he's played so many early queen moves. So going back, that's what happens if he takes this pawn, which has been, again, is the most played move here from black. So, you know, clearly not many people know this line. Okay, knight to f6 needs to be played here. But the problem here for black is, whilst it does defend this pawn twice, you've got two defenders, and there's only two attackers, it turns out that actually white can still play f takes an e4. And the reason why he can play this is because if the knight were to recapture, bishop to d3, you're now threatening this knight. Okay, this bishop can come to f5, but here a move such as queen to f3 is pretty good. You're now renewing this threat. d5 could be played, but now you can play the powerful knight to e5, hitting this queen, removing one of the defenders away from the knight. The queen could move to e6, but here you can actually take this other pawn, because after queen takes on d5, you take here. This is not actually looking all that good for black now. He's down slightly materially, and well, after a move such as queen to g4, knight here, it's funny because there's the reason why g4 was played is actually threatens checkmate here. So a very, very powerful move. So you have to play this move because that stops at least checkmate for a move, but this runs into c4 now, and well, yeah, it's not too good for black here. He could play this move, you develop a piece, and really we've just made black's position look ridiculous after this. This has been played in one game between 2,000 plus players online in a blitz match, but you can see here that white is doing really, really well. Okay, you might try this. I mean, the move that was played here, but I quite like the look of this. I don't see what's wrong with that. Takes here. I don't know, this looks interesting. Or alternatively, let's play the line that was played here in this game. Takes, king to e2, takes, wow. Very, very beautiful game. And he actually he's going to checkmate on this next move. Wow, really, really cool game that. So yeah, you can see that you can really make black's move order just look ridiculous after just a few moves here. So going back, I mean, what else can black really do in this position? Well, again, you can play bishop to e7, but here you can just put the pressure on with e5. I mean, these lines are really quite sharp. It's going to be hard to find these moves, so you're going to have to really do, you know, some preparation to make sure you can remember this. But, you know, knight to e4, queen to e3 should secure a good edge for the white side. Just to show you a few moves, you're ready to castle now, and you've got a nice position in the opening. You're up a pawn, and black really doesn't get anything that he really wants in this line. He's down. He's down slightly materially, but he's not got a good control of the centre. And I think white should do fine in these lines. So there we have it. There are some of the most fascinating lines in the Latvian Gambit. We've covered quite a bit in this line. Now, I will say there's some good news with this particular line. The Latvian Gambit comes up very, very rarely. We're looking at maybe 1% on the opening database. But if you do come across this line, you should have some decent understanding, hopefully by the end of this video, about how to deal with this line and how to get yourself a good edge on the white side. So it remains for me to say thank you for watching. Do make sure you watch some of my other videos that look at some of the other lines in my opening repertoire with 1e4. Our next line that we're going to have a look at very soon is the other dubious looking line, d5, known as the Elephant Gambit. So stay tuned for that and see how we can deal with this particular line. I'll see you soon. Take care, bye.